Well, hello everyone. Welcome to Christians Questions, a project of the New Tolerance campaign. Today I have a good guest with me, Mr. Charles Love, who is the author of Race Crazy and the host of the Cut the Bull podcast. And he's been a rather prominent voice on issues of race and identity and the cultural conversation. And so we're going to talk about topics relating to that. How are you doing, Charles?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. It's good to talk to you.
Before we get started, is there anything you would like to plug for the audience that you'd like them to know about?
I don't know the country. How about we all try to get focus on what's matter and not get mired down in just the bad. Bad, come ebbs and flows. So you can't really if things are bad, but don't think that the world is going to end. Invest in America. That's what I would say.
That's actually a very good point. I think it's a very good starting point as well. A lot of people, I don't care if they're on the left or the right, will generally just take a gaze at the cultural landscape and they will immediately see something that triggers their own sense of doom. And they'll then cross apply that in their entire thinking. And I think that that mentality is very unhealthy. How do you think we can combat that mentality? Because sometimes the strategy of seeing the glass half full, it's a nice thing to say, but sometimes it doesn't resonate as much as our deepest fears do. So how do we combat that, you think?
Uh, it's really hard, I guess, because there's so much coming at you, so much stimuli that tells you things are bad. I opened by saying things were bad, and they are. There are areas that need some serious work, but that doesn't mean, and I care about that, and I want to change that. But that doesn't mean I think doomsday is here. I don't think that tomorrow uh, everything, the country will end as you see it. I don't think it's going to happen if Trump wins. I don't think it's going to happen if Kamala wins. Um, there will be challenges with both. The challenges will be different. But how do we do it? It's hard because everything in our day to day, side note, we'll get into the social media thing because social media has been a great advocate, but it's part of the problem.
Yeah.
For many people, everything in your day to day tells you differently from what I'm saying. It tells you the sky is falling. Um, and for many reasons we can get into, or some other time in the future, we can get into how we got into the situation that Chicken Little and the wolf, the boy who cried wolf became the norm for everyday Americans. But that is a problem. And now we gave Chicken Little and that boy a platform to magnify that fear. So it
Hmm.
depends on what you listen to. I mean, the simple thing would be to limit, not necessarily shut up, but limit your intake of negativity. I'm on social media, and you talk about me speaking out about what I do. So I use it as a tool, but I spend most of my time laughing at people. I don't get too intent in it. I don't follow it. On the podcast, Will and I, so my co-host is Wilfred Reilly. He's very good at it. So we joke that, he's great. And I'm like a savant. I mean, an infant when it comes to it, but mostly it's by choice because I often say that Twitter's not real. That's the phrase I constantly say for many reasons we can get into. But I think the first step people can do is either to step away from it, don't take it so seriously, or just be mindful of how they use it.
Absolutely. Those are some very sound points. And it is interesting that you see a very big difference. You might interact with somebody on Twitter, but then if you ever got the chance to meet them in real life, in most cases, they tend to be totally different. And so I think that a lot of folks don't really realize that, and they should, just for their own sanity. So
Right.
moving on a little bit though, so you are, I mentioned in the intro, you're the author of a book called Race Crazy. So what was the main thesis of that book, and what point were you trying to drive home, and what events in the culture were you responding to when you wrote that book, if you were
Well,
responding to any?
I think I had two target audiences and two main points I was trying to address. But the things that were happening at the time, it was written after George Floyd died. So it was the ramp up of the, not necessarily the reaction to that, although that was in it. It was the ramp up of these aligned but parallel forces that were moving pushing, forcing the country to move in one direction. And that was the 1619 project. and BLM. BLM obviously wasn't new at that time. What was it, 6, 7 years old? It wasn't a new organization. People knew about it. Most people knew about it. A lot of people had an opinion on it, but most people didn't really take it seriously. People weren't donating large sums of money to it. Um, all that changed after George Floyd died. So I had a problem with that as a black man because of the way it was being used in the sense that white guilt was supercharged, as Shelby Steele would say. And people started to say, man, things are must really be bad. I mean, I don't know. I've never been a black person, so I'll take their word at it. Things are really bad. What can I do to help? Can't become black. Let's just throw some money. What's the first organization I see? BLM. So it was problematic because no one ever looked into the organization. I disagree with a lot of things they believe and definitely a lot of the solutions they called for. But that wasn't really the bigger problem I had. My biggest problem was they don't even believe what they're saying. So you're giving money to an organization, and I write about it saying that I try to give people their argument. So let's assume they're right. The country is racist to its core. The police are hunting black men down, and it's really bad. Let's assume that's true. So we need to combat that, and we need an organization who's going to fight against it. BLM, by its name, is that Black Lives Matter to end police brutality. But everything they did, every action they took, and all the money they spent, none of it went to that. And that's just for the people who agree with them. They were talking about Democrat policy issues, how to get Democrats elected. They were talking about immigration and ending enforcement of the immigration, illegal immigration at the border. They talked about all this ancillary thing, all of these Democrat talking points. They talked about centering women and focusing on, intersectional things. They talked about BDS and boycott, divest, and sanction Israel. They talked about all these other things. Very little comment and very little focus and money was being spent on policing. So if that's really your problem, you should probably focus on that. That's the one. The second was, I truly believe then and still now that, of course, if they lay out their beliefs, there's a decent percentage of people who agree with them. I believe the vast majority of people don't. What I was trying to get is to get the non-active, the people who think this is not best for society and the culture, to speak up. Because if you sit idly by, then the squeaky wheel will get the oil, and people will start to believe that this must be the case. Because every black person that I'm seeing on TV or hearing in the media is saying that they don't feel comfortable outside. They don't feel comfortable inside. They don't feel comfortable sleeping. They don't feel comfortable jogging. They don't feel comfortable eating at a restaurant. So it must be really bad to be black. But when I talk to black people, no black person is saying that their life is that terrible. Even those who think that there are problems still love America and love their lives. Last thing, white people were asking the wrong question. If you go back to it, you'll remember they asked Chris Rufo, they asked some other people in these gotcha interviews, white people, would you trade the women, Sarah Rao and the other woman who does the white people dinner? Would you trade places with a black person? Then all the white people look awkward because they feel like it's wrong for them to say no, but why would I want to do that? It seems bad. And it's this shocking moment. But what they never do is they never ask black people if they trade places with a white person, because everybody I know says no, they're totally happy being black. So if no one wants to trade places with anyone else of a different race, why is it so bad that the white person doesn't want to trade? So I just think they walked away from that thinking that black life is negative, that every black person has interactions with the police are going through the criminal justice system, that every black person is uneducated and every black person is poor. And it's simply not true.
Wow. Well, yeah, and that definitely does seem to have been the kind of cultural mood of the more left-leaning voices on race a few years ago. And it's interesting, though, how the critical race theory conversation, in my opinion, you let me know if this is your observation as well. It kind of whimpered out as fast as it came along. And I
Mhm.
think other issues like arose that overtook it in the public consciousness. Not saying it's not an important issue anymore. It still is an important issue. I think that it still forms the basis of a lot of left-wing teachings on race. But as far as being the thing to go after, it seems like people have moved on from critical race theory. Why do you think that is?
I may do you one better. I think that it would have fizzled out sooner. I think the people opposed to it were inadvertently giving it legs,
Oh,
right? So the
interesting.
more you call it out, the people stiffen in their defense of it, and the people who don't know anything about it, it's like, oh, I don't know what it is, but I don't like the people who are against it, or the people who are pushing it are framing it as, if you're against it, you're against black people. So of course people are like, oh, they're against black people. I got a problem with that. But if when you just take that apart in a calm conversation with your friends and family and just say, well, do you think that kids should be taught at, let's say 7 to 12-year-old, not high school where they're having deep, thoughtful, thought-provoking conversations, but before they really understand critical thinking, being told that there's this oppressor and oppressed dichotomy, and they have to be in one of the boxes. Most people said no, right? But they didn't know that was happening. So one, I think we gave it some life
Hmm.
and trying to fight against it, and the other was it kind of never really had legs to stand on, in the sense that even where people believe that there are inequalities that need to be addressed, that's different from saying, you know, the whole system is bad, or as we recently had Matt Walsh on the podcast, and we were talking
Yep.
about the movie Am I Racist? And
Yep.
there was a clip from the movie because he infiltrated that dinner, the famous dinner,
Yep.
and where Sarah Rowell just says America is an effed up, terrible piece of crap country, and the whole thing needs to be turned down. I don't think most people believe that, right? So if you give it enough air and you push back against it, but not in an aggressive way, like they hate this country, just say, tell me what you think. Most people are like, well, I wouldn't go that far. But we never really allowed them, which was the point in my book, there's a lot of long clips or excerpts of BLM just saying what they really mean. Because if you recall, there was a time when they would say, what was it? Defund the police.
Yeah.
And people defending them would say, well, that's not really what it means. You're just being silly. You're taking it literal. They don't really mean to fund the police. They mean to, bring in some other resources and allocate resources to help, mental health and all these other things. They don't mean not have police. That's silly. Okay, go to the website, look up what they say. We are abolitionists. We are for the full dismantling of all police officers in school safety officers, border patrol, ICE, everything. They say that. So they are for it. So just let them use their own words and they would, hang themselves with their idiocy.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Absolutely. And actually, I wanted to actually get into am I racist? That's actually my next question. So yeah, you do host that podcast with Wilfred, and you've seen the movie, right? I assume.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so I when I saw his appearance, his cameo in the movie, I really couldn't stop laughing. It was like really brilliant. And I wonder, what do you think about that movie in general? Do you think that it's going to impact the culture on this issue? Or some critics have been saying it's like a few years too late. What's your perspective of it?
Well, to the critics who say it's too late, maybe they should have started movies earlier, but the fact that they're doing them are important. And it's really, I think the problem is people made this mistake before fighting from that side. They made the mistake of saying, looking at it as a cost benefit analysis, specifically, like, is the movie going to make money like a Lord of the Rings movie? It's a different concept. But also, is it going to impact the culture? It may or may not, but that's the wrong question. It's not about whether this particular movie will. It's, will it open the door for there to be an influx of movies? And if there's enough movies, they will. So I don't really think one movie of this type will influence the culture enough, not as much as we would hope. But I think a continual production of movies like this will. And so it has to start somewhere. I think abdicating your power and your voice by removing your liberal Hollywood and then removing yourself from Hollywood, all that does is make Hollywood more liberal, right? Because only those people are left making movies. And and the part that's most important to me, and that's why I keep talking about social media not being real. One of the things we talked about with Matt, I said, so Matt had, and he confirmed it. So Matt has 3 million followers, right? He made this movie, he's going to get more famous. 2 points I made. Go check out the podcast. One was I interviewed people who saw the movie with me afterwards. A couple of them didn't know who Matt Walsh was. They just had a movie pass for free movies so they can go movies as often as they want. And they
Wow.
just thought it was interesting. If you watch the Joe Rogan podcast, Joe Rogan asked him how he got Robin DiAngelo. And he said, I told Robin DiAngelo my name. She didn't know who I was. So the problem is we make the mistake in thinking all these people who have millions of followers on social media. They do good work. They do make some input. In fact, I'm not saying they don't, but the people I think it's most important to move don't know who Matt Walsh, Candace Owens, and all the rest of them are. Right? Your Uber drivers and your school bus drivers and your restaurant managers and your clerks at the grocery store, they don't know who these people are. So one advance of the movie is the movie will get out everywhere. Last thing, if you think about one of the points I've been making recently to put a final point on it is Tucker Carlson at the time was the biggest person on cable news on the right, millions of followers, millions of people watching, 2 point something million people watching the show every night. At the same time, we were making fun of late night talk shows losing their influence because they were getting too political. All that's true. But at the end of the day, you walk around Idaho, the south side of Chicago, Florida, anywhere you pick in the country, and just stop people on the street. Way more people would know Jimmy Fallon and Jimmy Kimmel than they would Tucker Carlson. So entertainment, unfortunately, matters.
That's interesting. That is really interesting. Yeah, that's interesting because a lot of people mistake, there's this perception, maybe this is going to be true, who knows, but that social media fame in the future will translate into more real world fame because social media is relatively still in its infancy. It's only like what, 18 something years old. It's obviously older than that, but some of the platforms that we use right now
Well,
only
not
came
that.
in the past decade or so. So
Yep.
I think there may be a maturation phase, but you're right, that traditional media kind of still clings on. More people know who, for example, Denzel Washington is than they may even know Gina Carano. It's very interesting how that works.
Right. And it may change, but for right now, there's too many people, and it's an age thing too. So too many people over 40 are on social media. So you think they count, but they're like just like glancing from the side. They're not active.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
if they're not following these people, there's an algorithm. So if you don't follow the right people, if you're just reaching out to high school friends and posting pictures of food, you're never going to see this stuff.
you're right. You're right. Yeah. So, kind of in that same sphere, DEI has kind of been having, it had its moment, and it's also kind of having, according to some people, its decline. A lot of institutions like the University of North Carolina are ditching their DEI programs and replacing them with something entirely different. A lot of businesses are divesting from ESG and things of that sort. What do you think of all this? What do you think, is causing this? And do you think this is the beginning of the end for DEI and American institutions?
I don't think it's the big. Well, it might, I don't know, beginning of the end. It might be the beginning of the end, but that end is going to take a while to kind of fizzle out. But I think that while many of us, myself included, and many people with a much bigger platform were trying to sound the alarm about why this stuff was bad, the bottom line is that's why entertainment, getting in front of people, because some people, unless it's all human nature. People react when it affects them directly. So I might see a news story. Let's think of a news. Let's not even make a DEI. See a news story, see something bad, tornado, a serial killer, whatever. You think it's bad. Oh, that's terrible. Well, because we care, we're passionate. But the first thing we think after it's terrible is, where was it? I'm in Cleveland. It was in California. Right? That's just nature, right? Like it's sad, but I'm safe, right? So what happened with a lot of the DI stuff, same thing with the gender stuff, all that stuff, people would complain about it and people would either not hear it or they hear it and say, oh, that's messed up. That's a one-off. But the moment it hit their school or their kid or their family, now they're carrying the torch and they're ready to fight. So that's the biggest challenge people like me have is it's hard to get to people, but even when you get to them, they're just going to show. They're like, yeah, I guess it's bad, but it's not that big of a deal until it happens to them. So that's kind of a situational thing that you can't really get over. But the bottom line is it was a mist. It wasn't real. No one really whether we can debate whether it's important or not, but no one really wanted it. That's why I let them hang themselves with their own words. No one wanted diversity, equity, and inclusion because if you wanted it, you'd want it for everyone, right? So you want to mandate that corporations like in California have a certain percentage of blacks on the board, but you don't want a certain percentage of whites in the NBA, right? We argue about college admission. Me as a regular person, just thinking, sitting back, this stuff fascinates me that really people smarter than me weren't making this argument. So we argue about college admissions to the point that it went to the Supreme Court, but no one's honest about, we're not talking about college admission. Plenty of black people and poor whites get into college. Many of them shouldn't be going to college. We're not talking about college admission. What are we talking about? Let's just be honest, right? Before we can decide who's right or wrong, let's be honest. We're talking about admission to elite colleges. It's not college admission. We don't care how many blacks or Asians or immigrants or whites get into college. We care how many get into Harvard. And when you frame it properly, then you have to be honest and say, huh. So from a DEI standpoint, now that we're being honest about the topic, do you have an inherent right to go to an elite private college? Most people would say no.
Right.
No, every black person shouldn't have the same opportunity to get into Harvard. Every white person, every poor person. No, right? The whole point that it's elite, you should be the best of the best academically, and that
Yeah.
is how you get in. Once we frame it right, because black kids can go to public colleges all over the country. So that's not the problem. So we're not being honest about diversity to begin with. So how can we talk about the importance of diversity when we're not being honest about it? And that's why it's falling apart.
Absolutely. And I think the way that they define diversity too is also it's really limiting in terms of that concept because they really just define diversity, it seems, as diversity of minorities as opposed to diversity, as you mentioned, of everybody or people of, forget race, people of different worldviews, people of different religions, people
Yeah,
of different, the diversity seems to be restricted to race. And so
right,
that kind of feeds into the whole grievance industry that they're trying to make with DEI.
right.
And so, speaking of that, though, speaking of race, and this is my last question before we go, and I appreciate your time so much.
Oh, whatever.
Um, one of the concepts that I saw a few years ago in the discussions about race and critical race theory is the concept of lived experience. And this is
Mm-hmm.
a concept that has bothered me for a very, very long time. And
A long time.
so, what do you think about the concept of lived experience? Because there's been times where I've gotten conversations with people about race, and they told me, well, I'm a 60-year-old Latino or 60, or I'm a 50-year-old black person. No one can tell me that America's not racist because I've seen too much. And it almost kind of creates this shield of impenetrability where you can't even question or pose a different thought to them without them taking personal offense to it. So, what do you
Mm-hmm.
think about the idea of lived experience? And do you think that it by itself is a sufficient standard of knowledge, or should it be part of a more holistic approach that incorporates other things?
I think it's terrible. It's absolutely catastrophic because one, it's on both sides. On one side, it's senseless because there's 300 and 50 million Americans, so there's 350 million lived experiences. So they to try to bucket the lived experience like this is the black experience when there's millions, not a few thousand, there's millions of people who are black who don't have that experience seems kind of limiting. And then to write policy or move culture based on this false lived experience is a problem. Number two, they're saying they have a narrative they want to fit. So if your lived experience fits into that, it's okay. But if your lived experience is different, then they want to shut you up. So if you're a black person, my lived experience is that I come from an affluent family and, I don't live in the inner city and everybody in my family has a PhD, then your lived experience means less because it doesn't fit the narrative we want to be. But it's also a problem for the individual. So we're allowing people, the self-esteem movement already partially ruined the country because it made everybody think, they were more important and how they feel is what's important. And they were greater than they were. And it's all about me, me, me. Now we're layering that on with the fact that it's whatever you feel your lived experience is, but sometimes you may be wrong. I fail, and I believe it's because my teacher is biased against me. That becomes fact, not my opinion. And then I get to move through life based on this, belief that I have that may not even be true, because what the teacher believed and what they were using to assess you is not factored into it because what they did doesn't matter. It's only what you believe. So it's limiting you. It allows people to cop out. I remember a lot of black people used to say, if they're older in their 50s or so, they grew up in the 70s. My parents used to say, there are plenty of white people out there who want to see you fail. So you have to work twice as hard to get ahead. They all remember saying that. This slight difference in the generation after or two generations after, slight change, made a world of difference. The parent at that time, kids the same age, 30, 40 years removed, would say, there's some people out there who want to see you fail. So you should work hard. They're not telling me not to work hard. But if you fail, it's not your fault. It's the system that's out to get you. Now, the parent actually said, you should still try. But what the kid heard was, if you fail, it's not your fault. It gave them an out. It gave them an out. So if I fail, it's not my fault. So you're setting people up. It's the reason why the children of people, black children of parents who came out through the civil rights movement, through post Second World War, had a level of resiliency and in the face of overt racism that the younger kids today, in the freest amount of access and opportunity that they've ever had, feel like they're slighted. That's why Joe Biden can tell you you're facing Jim Crow 2.0, and they clap and nod, where normal people will be like, country's not perfect. But 2.0 usually means stronger, more powerful version. Remember T2, Terminator 2 had
Mhm.
skills that the Terminator didn't have. He was stronger and bigger. So to say we're living in Jim Crow 2.0 is to imply that we are living in times that are more racist, more difficult, fewer opportunities, and harder for blacks than they were in the 50s. And that's an affront to the generations before us.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I couldn't have said it any better myself. So, Charles, I appreciate it. Thank you so much. You did a very, very awesome job here edifying the audience, I believe. Is there anything you'd like to say before we close?
I would just say, as we draw closer, I know there's days away from the election. Uh, like I said, it to open. Don't let it to change your perspective. Don't let it cause you to lose your focus. And stay on social media. You can get some good context and some good information, but don't believe everything you hear. Not in the sense that it's not true, but because the social media is skewed, right? It's skewed. It's a limited number of people, but they skew more intelligent, more successful, more politically active. So you're getting a skewed view. You're not getting the everyman view. So go out and talk to your friends. So take that stuff from social media and then create a fun game. That's what I would ask you to do. Go to your friends and family, find out how much they're on social media. And if they're not a lot, ask them a couple questions. Do they know about the biggest fights on social media? Guarantee you that they won't know. Ask them, do they know what's going on between Chris Rufo and James Lindsay? They'll probably say, who are they? I know them both personally, but they'll say, I don't know who they are. And then ask them, what they think about certain things, and they'll say, oh, I think it's bad, but it's not that big of a deal. I think the country's fine. My white friends get along. They'll say the total opposite of the doom and gloom you're hearing on social media, and that will tell you that the truth lies somewhere in the middle.
All right. Thank you so much for being here, Charles. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Bye.